Hey everybody, I'm Deanna Corby. This is my husband, Steven. We've never done a video together, so anyway, with all the stuff that's been going on, the recent topics in the equestrian world, I thought it would be smart to have a lawyer provide some input, because I've been asking him some stuff like about SafeSport and about the shooting and about the George Morris ban. And anyway, I thought I would share and have him talk about what his experience is with the law. But anyway, I just wanted to first say a little something about Dressage Hub. Dressage Hub and Lauren apparently don't get along, and Dressage Hub has taken to her platform to stand up for a convicted, charged shooter who is charged with attempted murder. And I just want to remind you guys, it's really easy to be brave behind a keyboard, but when you say something, I think it's important to not say anything that you wouldn't say to someone's mother. So when Dressage Hub says that she stands behind, or that she, yeah, we just put it up on the screen.
Yep.
that it's hard to die from a wound if you don't have a heart. And when Dressage Hub says stuff like she stands behind Michael Barisone, and I understand she might not have known all the details at the time or whatever, but when you use a platform to try, in the end, to make money off of it, basically, because she is a professional YouTuber, but when you use a platform to intentionally hurt someone else, I just think that, I don't know, it's too far. And anyway, that's what I want to say on that. I didn't really think that Dressage Hub could go that much lower, but here we are. Anyway, moving on to the Michael Barisone thing. Apparently Lauren, I don't know Lauren in person, but I know her on the internet, and we've chatted sometimes. And apparently Lauren had her horses in training, 5 horses in training with Michael Barisone, and she was living on the property. And there have been tons of articles about it recently. And I'm sure you all, or most of you, have seen them, and you're kind of up to date with that. But what I was asking Steven is the legalities and what being charged with attempted murder means, and you know what it all means, and why. I don't know. You talk.
Well, it's a weird day when Deanna and I's career paths intersect. It's a very strange thing when the law and the horse world meet, but sometimes that happens. And we've been talking a lot about it over the, a lot of these crazy things that have happened over the last 48 hours. And as she mentioned before, if you guys have any questions for me, drop them in the comment section, or even for her, and we'll gladly talk about them. We'll put them up on the screen. We'll talk about your questions as we go along. But specifically with this situation, she wanted to know a few things. And when she first started talking to me about it, it had just broken, that Lauren had been shot, taken to the hospital, and she was in surgery. And apparently she's still in critical condition, but luckily she survived. And they didn't even know at first who the shooter was. All we had known was that there was a bunch of stuff that was posted online from her about being bullied, and about a bunch of other stuff with SafeSport and her getting a lawyer and stuff like that. But then it all came out that Michael Barisone apparently was the shooter. He was taken into custody. And so she and I were first talking, and this is when he was just taken into custody, but before he's charged. So the police can take you and hold you without charging you with a crime depending on the state, 24 to 48 hours, sometimes up to 72 hours, without actually charging you with something. So, and when they do that, it's usually because they want to interview you, they want to gather facts and evidence, and they want to figure out what's going on. And in this particular situation, they took him into custody, and in less than 24 hours, they eventually charged him with attempted murder.
And people are saying stuff about like it was self-defense.
Yeah.
That's what I think we should share is that why do you think it was not self-defense?
Well, I'm very sure that if he decides to go to trial, self-defense is absolutely the defense strategy he's going to try. It's a hard defense strategy. It's not, you're not really going to win it very often. But what I would say is the evidence has to be very slim on self-defense, because the police department is not going to take a risk in charging somebody sooner than they have to with attempted murder unless they think the self-defense claim is very weak or probably non-existent, right? For instance, as far as we know, there was only one gun at the scene. You only get to use a firearm in self-defense if you are defending yourself or others from serious bodily injury or death. Serious bodily injury, not assault, serious bodily injury or death. Your life has to be in imminent danger. And I think if she doesn't have a firearm and he does, it's going to be very hard for him to be able to claim that he was in serious bodily injury. So I think the fact is that the police could have held him for a lot longer. And if they weren't sure, they probably would have held him for that maximum time before charging him. They would have done more investigation. They would have interviewed more people.
How long can the police hold him for?
Like I said, I'm not specifically sure in New Jersey. It changes depending on the state, but in most states it's 48 to 72 hours. And they charged him before 24. So that must mean that they think it's a pretty strong case and there's not a lot of self-defense there. I think you said something that was just reported today about what he was saying when he got taken into custody.
Yeah, he was saying, I had a good life. I had a good life. So he knew what he did,
yeah,
I guess.
Ostensibly, he knew that he didn't really have justification for it. And the truth is, we don't know. We don't know if he talked to the police. We don't know if he confessed or told them anything. But all I would say is this. You don't charge somebody like this on a crime like this sooner than you have to, unless it's pretty strong evidence. And we have a couple of different questions and comments. Elizabeth just asked, they also could have charged him later, right? And that's true. They could have. They could have let him go while they completed a full investigation and decided to charge him. There's no statute of limitations on a felony, which means the clock isn't going to run out. So they didn't decide to do that because they thought that the case was so strong. And that is very telling. If the police think the case is so strong, maybe he confessed, maybe there's another neutral witness, maybe, like I said, he had a gun and she didn't, and therefore there's almost no way to prove self-defense in that situation.
The whole thing is so sad. You know, the horse world is full of crazy bitches. I mean, let's be real. The horse world, they're all crazy.
I don't know anything about that.
Anyway, I saw some people saying well, you know, you can only put up with so much crazy. So, but that is, I don't know, that's insane. To say that just because someone's being crazy, they deserve to be shot, that's a legitimate reason to shoot someone, is just because they were being crazy. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine a scenario in which you would feel driven to that point. But from what we know from Lauren's postings, she hired a lawyer. She apparently contacted SafeSport and was starting to get into an investigation about the allegations that she made about bullying and him drinking and harassment. And so you don't know. I mean, maybe he had a breakdown, but there's certainly nothing that, from what I've heard, there's certainly nothing that justifies what happened. And the only thing that could justify it is if he thought that his life was in danger, and I don't see how you get there.
I'm sad I don't know Michael, but I know that he's a very accomplished, obviously, equestrian. I'm sad for him that this came about, and I'm sure, you know, he regrets it. I mean, I can't even imagine what he's going through, and obviously it's horrible for Lauren, but anyway, just wanted to share that little bit from a lawyer's perspective about some of the legal stuff, going on. But I posted earlier also about George Morris, the legendary icon. And so SafeSport has determined that, what was the article? That he's banned for life.
Yeah.
For, how was it worded?
Well, they don't tell you specifically, but it was their actual category says
sexual misconduct with a minor.
Says it actually says criminal misconduct, and then it says with minors. That's the technical term. Yes.
And believe me, I do think that George Morris is the greatest of all time. One of the greatest equestrians that's ever lived, and everything like that. And I was invited to or join the Facebook group I Stand with George Morris, but I feel like I don't have all the facts yet, and I don't know if I stand with him. I want to, I really do, but also, I've had a very close relationship with a rape victim who was afraid to come forward for years. And there has to be a place for rape victims to go and speak. So I don't know.
When Deanna first talked to me about this, I actually had brought up to her that I had seen some comments from a lot of people talking about SafeSport, a lot of her friends talking about how they feel like some people said it was unconstitutional.
Yeah, I wanted to bash SafeSport, and I wanted to say, this man is 81. Give him, he's on his last chapter, basically, of his life. Why bring up something from 50 years ago? Give this man what he, the respect that he deserves from having such an amazing career in the equestrian world. So that's how it started off for me. That's what I was thinking. But then when I was talking with Steven, he pointed out some things that kind of changed my perspective a little bit.
So I think we're going to talk a little bit about his situation, and then we'll talk a little bit about how SafeSport works, because I've been researching it, and I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about the process. But when I first started talking to her, and she said the same thing, why would you go back so far and bring it up? Well, multiple people brought accusations forward once SafeSport got involved, once the USEF actually decided to go ahead and implement it. And that's kind of the purpose. That's the reason it got brought into existence, is because these people and a lot of other people felt that they couldn't bring things forward before without being significantly penalized or attacked in the industry. And that's kind of what SafeSport decided to do, is it's created a process that tries to be fair to both the victims and the accusers, but also keeps everything sealed so that the victims who do go ahead and announce it and tell people what's going on, won't have to feel like they're going to be attacked or bullied by other people in the industry, because no one's allowed to share that information. Mm-hmm. And so, specifically with what happened with George Morris is a lot more than what people, I think, realize. It's not some imaginary, shadow group that came in and said, okay, you're banned for life. You can't do anything.
Yeah, I think this was a 2-year process.
Yeah, the 2-year investigation involving multiple victims that reported it. We don't know how many, but we know there was at least more. There was 3 or more. That's what we know.
And one of the victims, though, you were saying is in jail.
Correct.
So you can kind of take him off the chart.
Yeah, I imagine he's got very little credibility. He's sitting in jail for a felony. But there were other victims that came forward as well. We know that there were multiple ones. So then, SafeSport didn't just remove him. They launched a 2-year investigation where they hired FBI investigators, former FBI investigators, to get involved in the process and to start figuring out what's going on. And so then, I think, and I'll go ahead and answer this question right here. Hillary said, can you explain how I knew it was a 2-year process? The New York Times. The New York Times reported it today. It was a follow-up article, I think. Or it was today or yesterday night. It was one of the two. But the New York Times reported it was a 2-year-long investigation featuring former FBI investigators. So that's how we know it was a 2-year process, because they're not going to say that unless they have it dead to rights. And so you are bringing up a 2-year investigation, but it doesn't just go to an end, right? So those investigators take statements from every single person in the process. They take a statement from Morris and his attorneys. They take statements from any witnesses he wants them to talk to. They take statements from any witnesses from the victims or anyone they want to talk to, and anyone they want to talk to on themselves. Then once they compile that information, they send it up to SafeSport, who decides what they want to do. And if they think it's serious enough, they then take that investigation and they send it on to kind of an arbitrator who decides these things. I'm going to post a chart in a little bit when we start talking about SafeSport in general. So they did all of that, and then they came out with the decision to ban him for life. And you have to remember that they didn't have to just ban him for life. It wasn't like do nothing or ban him for life. They had a variety of things that they could have done to him. They could have given him a letter of condemnation, a private warning. They could have
for a
temporary suspension.
Yeah.
They could have done a variety of things, but they chose to ban him for life, which should probably tell you that the evidence was quite substantial.
What about the 10,000 people that he's been with or whatever?
Yeah, I mean,
how did they get that?
That was from his memoir. He wrote a memoir where he mentioned something in his memoir about having had maybe 10,000 sexual partners, but I don't really know how much that matters in the grand scheme because we're not talking about.
I'm
being
saying
a philanderer.
it got me, thinking a different train of thought, I guess.
Yeah. So, when you are talking about SafeSport in general, I think a lot of people are pretty upset because they don't understand how it works that well. And so
I was kind of like, okay, SafeSport is this third-party organization, but they need to mind their own business in a way and stay out of the USEF. And what I was saying yesterday is that I think a lot of people are thinking that SafeSport is acting as its own governing body.
Sure.
But what you were saying is that basically the USEF is a private organization,
yep.
and they have a set of rules. And if you don't abide by those rules, you can't be in their organization.
Yeah, and so when I saw people talking about how it was unconstitutional, it drove me a little crazy because it's not, right? He can be criminally charged, and then you have the full legal side of things, right? He wasn't, as far as I know, or he hasn't been yet. You can be civilly sued, in which case you can get sued for money damages, and then you have another court process to go through, right? But in this situation, the USEF is a private organization, and they can make whatever rules they want to determine who can be a member and who can't be. They can't stop people from. He can go train horses, and he can go teach clinics, and he can give seminars, and he can travel. What he can't do is be a part of USEF events. That's all they can do. That's all they can do. Anything that involves the USEF, he's not allowed to do directly with them, and that's what they're allowed to do. And I want you to imagine a scenario in which you have a private book club, and inside your house you bring people in for this book club all the time, and then one time someone comes in and someone else in your book club complains about them and says, look, when it was just me and him, he started sexually harassing me and I didn't want him here and blah, 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 blah. You don't have to charge him criminally to tell him you can't come back to my house. That's your decision, right? You can kick him out of your house, and that's what they did. They kicked him out of the house. But it's not even quite done yet because there is another step that he can go through an appeal, and we'll talk about that as well. But I don't think about it like he doesn't get the court system. He does have the court system. But the USEF is also allowed to decide what they want to do. If you have an employee, you can fire them most places for anything, really. As long as it's not a discriminatory reason, you can fire somebody. And if one of your employees comes to you and says, another employee molested me, I can fire them. And I don't have to have a reason, and I don't need to go to court to do it. I'm allowed to fire them because it's my house. And that's kind of how it works here. But SafeSport is really actually a pretty substantially big process. And I think a lot of people don't realize it, but it has a lot more protections than any of the scenarios I just mentioned, than book clubs or employers. It actually has a really long process and it has a very strict set of rules. I can show that right now. So this is a little chart, and I'm going to have to block Deanna a little bit. Sorry. This is a little chart that kind of talks about what happens when SafeSport gets involved here. Yeah. Well, I can't make it smaller. They're going to see it.
It's okay.
All right, we'll do like this. You guys can only get to see like one of my eyes. So they do like a little chart here. and they tell you what happens, right? The first thing, they get a phone call, a text, or a website, right? And I don't think you can see my pointer, but I'm pointing at it. And then you go straight to, okay, so is this conduct covered? If not, then they just report it to other people and they leave it alone. Or is it something that happened in regards to the Olympics, the Paralympics, or in this case, USEF? Yes, okay, then they go down. Is it sexual misconduct, or is it emotional or physical misconduct? If it's emotional and physical, they can choose to kick it out, right? Yeah, I know, that's what she wants to do, Laura. She wants to cover me up. But if it's sexual misconduct, they have to take it. It's not they've agreed that they will take all the sexual things, right? In terms of figuring out if those are true or not. So then we go to the next step. Then there's an intake process where they preliminarily gather information before deciding on how they want to do it. And then three things can happen here. One, you can have an informal resolution, which is the accuser and the perpetrator can agree to work it out mutually with like a mediator and then resolve it. And then it goes away. No one ever knows about it. It's done. Or if SafeSport believes the allegations are so just uncredible and then they don't have enough backing, then they can decide on themselves to kick it out. They can administratively kick it out and say, I don't think this is even worth our resources to investigate. And then they have the third option, which is they can refer it for a formal resolution, which is what happened in this case with George Morris. They then, next step, assign a trained investigator. They conduct interviews, all relevant information, and prepare a formal investigator report that goes to a director who gets to decide at that point what to do, right? So then, during this process, by the way, the person who's accused can also make statements and can review that information and things like that. So then we get to the resolution. It goes to the investigator's report. Once that's actually done, a notice of a decision is made, and they determine whether or not they believe conduct that is in violation of SafeSport's policies have happened. If they think it did happen, they would then go to a sanction, and if not, it's done, right? So then they say, okay, I think based on all this information, and in this case with George Morris, 2 years with trained FBI investigators, they said, we find the information to be so credible that we are going to ban him for life. Not private admonition, not a letter of caution, not a temporary suspension, but a lifetime ban, which means that it's got to be significant, right? But I know you were talking about what happens. This isn't a trial. How come he doesn't get to say his piece, even though he did get to say his piece? But there's an appeal, which is what he's doing now. And that's why you guys have to understand that there's an arbitration. That's the next step. It's not done. If he wants to appeal the decision, which his lawyer said he is going to appeal, he then goes to an arbitration. And that arbitration is basically a court process. It's a little less formal with an arbitrator. Some of the rules of evidence aren't as strong, but it's still a very formal process where you have lawyers and witnesses and evidence and documents, and they have to actually prove what's going on. And I know there's people who have posted up with questions about how do you know there's proof or what is credible proof. That's up for the arbitrator to decide what's credible or not. And you might be asking yourself, okay, well, who is an arbitrator and why does he get to decide what's going on, right? Well, I have another thing that I looked up to figure out who these arbitrators are, and they're really qualified people. So if you look at who the arbitrators are, they have all this other experience. They have to be independent, which means they can't be a member of any of the governing bodies. They can't be a member of the USEF, of the Olympic Committee, anything like that. They got to be completely independent. They have to have some sort of knowledge of sexual assault and domestic violence, and then they have to have all this working experience. For instance, they have to be a judge or have been a district attorney or a defense attorney with specific experience in sexual conduct. I've been a lawyer almost a decade. I don't qualify. Intern in the DA's office. I couldn't do this because I don't have enough sexual conduct experience to be able to be an arbitrator here. And then they have like other people that could be at like law enforcement with sexual misconduct, social workers with that kind of experience, guardian ad litem with that kind of experience. But in general, all the arbitrators that I've seen have been either prosecutors or lawyers or judges that have this experience, or sometimes law enforcement. So that's the type of information that these people have to draw from when they're making an arbitration decision, and they're going to want some strong evidence before it. So while George Morris at this point has the decision is to ban him, there's still another part of the process. He gets to have an entire hearing to determine guilt or innocence for the perspective of SafeSport.
I think that Peggy brings up a good point about why is this made public and the whole guilty before.
Sure. Well, the truth of the matter is it's not made public by George, and it wasn't made public by SafeSport, and it wasn't made public by the USEF. It was made public by one of the accusers. One of the accusers came forward and announced it publicly, what happened. That's how everyone knew about it.
That's how so that's how it got leaked?
That's how it got leaked, and it got leaked several years ago, actually. The only reason you're hearing about it again now that it's actually concluded is because when the USEF reaches a decision, they announce that.
Oh, okay.
They don't announce the investigative report. They don't announce what they found.
But I think everybody's just upset that that SafeSport is tainting his name by this decision before it goes to a formal jury and judge.
Well, it'll never go to a jury, and it goes to an arbitrator, which is a one or sometimes three panel of people who are qualified, like I mentioned, to make that decision, who have experience in this stuff. But the decision was made because...
So the victims went to SafeSport, they didn't go...
Correct.
Okay.
The victims didn't go to the news. They went to SafeSport. They reported it. As soon as SafeSport came out, they reported it actually probably as soon as SafeSport took over in the USEF.
Yeah.
And then that went through a formal process that I just described. After a 2-year investigation, they decided to go ahead and issue the directive, which is after they've looked at all the evidence, they decided to ban him. He's decided to appeal, in which case that will go to an arbitrator's decision. But right now, he's banned at this time until an arbitrator's decision either confirms that ban, lowers his sentence to something else, or finds that the accusations are not credible. But the director of SafeSport is the one who decided to ban him. And the director of SafeSport has a significant amount of significant amount of experience with sexual accusations and sexual misconduct as well. I looked her up. She has a very large resume. And that report went to her. She decided to do it, and then he's deciding to appeal it. But the reason it comes out now is the vast majority of people who are banned from SafeSport don't appeal it. The vast majority. You're only hearing about George Morris because it's such a big deal, but if you go to the USEF SafeSport website and you click on the people who are banned, there are quite a few of them, and almost all of them, unfortunately, have to deal with sexual conduct with minors.
Wow. It's crazy. It's a crazy time to be an equestrian right now because of these Olympians and this drama kind of all happening at once. Like I said in my post earlier, I've always been so proud of the equestrian world, but now my dad called me earlier to tell me about the shooting, and he doesn't have anything to do with horses at all, and even he knew, and I just felt shame and embarrassment. And like I said, personally, I want to root for Michael Barisone and George Morris, but because I want to root for the equestrians of the world. I want to root for the sport and for equestrians and for horses, and I want them to do well and be good people. But the evidence against them is kind of stacking up, and I don't want to root for a murderer or whatever.
Child molester
or,
I think that a lot of equestrians don't want their icons being taken down, and they're afraid that casts some negative light on the horse community.
Yes, that's why I wanted to jump on the bandwagon of say, I stand with George Morris.
Yeah. But I think you also have to look at the other aspects if you don't do this. SafeSport was really put into place because of the Nasser situation, right? 200 victims of sexual assault from him. And obviously that's insane, right? But if you do not have a process by which victims and families can report misconduct without fear of retaliation, then it's not ever going to get reported. It's going to sit there, and here's what's going to happen. Some really good kids, especially kids, but athletes too, are just going to fall out of the sport. They're going to leave because they don't want to be assaulted anymore. They don't want that drama. They don't want to have to deal with it. They're just going to leave. And you're going to have a dying sport that people don't want to put their kids in, that people don't want to be a part of anymore because they don't feel like it's safe. And I understand that SafeSport might seem like a large overreaction to the problem, but if you do not take drastic measures to protect especially children from sexual predators, I mean, you're not going to have any children involved in those sports anymore. I mean, look what's happening with football right now. There's too many concussions going on right now, so people don't want their kids to go ahead and play football anymore, and because the NFL didn't do anything about it, and it's starting to hurt them. But it's the same type of things here, but you also have to look at the other things. Like, there is a way more drastic situation that they could have done, right? SafeSport, the USEF could have just said, if 2 people accuse you of something, you're gone. I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore. You're out, right? They could have done that, but they didn't. They enacted the process that I showed you earlier in this sheet, right? They enacted that process because they determined that we want to make sure it's as fair as it can be across all process, right? We want it to be a neutral, independent investigation with a neutral, independent hearing where everyone can have representation and a chance to be heard, and then only a qualified individual gets to make a decision, or sometimes panel of individuals gets to make a decision about what happens. And that's exactly what happened with George Morris. I mean, 2 years and a lot of individuals. Now, what could happen in arbitration? Anything, right? Maybe he's cleared. That would be fantastic, and it's really sad that that happened, but he probably would have legal recourse against the people who accused him. Maybe he's not cleared. Maybe they lower his suspension, or maybe they find that it's sufficient. But you're not talking about some random person. You're talking about a person who competed in the Olympics. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't ban somebody like that unless you were sure. I mean, dead sure, especially at someone who's 81 years old. You got to be really sure. And I think that that's probably the reason why they did it. There's some comments and questions I wanted to scroll back up to. Peggy says this. She says it's an accusation for their 60s. How can there be any credible evidence? Well, Peggy, all evidence is evidence, right? You don't have to have physical evidence. You know, CSI and all those shows kind of tell you that if you don't have like a DNA kit that you can't convict, and that's just not true, right? We're talking about multiple accusers who independently would give their stories.
So it matters that it was multiple versus just one.
Yeah.
Even though the one guy is not very credible because he's in jail or whatever.
We only know one of the accusers. We know the only accuser we know that's publicly spoken up is the one that's been in jail for a felony and actually is in jail right now for a felony. But we know from the New York Times article that there's at least 3. At least. We don't know how many more there are, but we know that there's 3 people. And I can tell you, I mean, look, I can't guarantee anything, but I can tell you if it was just one dude who's sitting in jail for a felony making an accusation, no one's going to ban him for that because no one's going to believe it. But that's not what we have. We have 3 accusers, but that doesn't mean there's just 3 witnesses. We have everyone who's ever worked with George Morris. You have every hand that ever worked with him. You got every working student that's ever worked with him. You have to imagine that all these people were interviewed. And if all these people were interviewed, I mean, read the article. In the New York Times article, there are other people talking who said that other people knew what was going on and suspected these things throughout it. And if you suspect these things throughout it and you have these other people out there that correspond and confirm with what was said, then, that is evidence. Let's see. Laura says, given the times we are in with so many high-profile incidents by well-known athletics programs and people's children, I'm sure these groups are being proactive. MSU, Penn State face enormous lawsuits for not protecting children in the name of athletics. Yeah, I mean, that's a good one too, right? You got to protect yourself from lawsuits, and the USDF is probably trying to do that too. But I think that they, like I said, and trying to protect kids, but they're also trying to protect themselves, sure. Let's see.
Can George be charged legally? All these years later? Like, what's going to happen with him if this whole case goes forward?
Sure. So,
81.
what I will tell you is that SafeSport are mandatory reporters, which means that if they find that sexual misconduct has occurred, they are mandated to report it to law enforcement. And at this point, it's positive that they absolutely have reported it to law enforcement at some point. There is not a statute of limitation for felonies in most states. I don't know if there is one in New Jersey, but I would say probably not.
No, I don't know if George Morris is in New
Oh,
Jersey.
I'm sorry.
That's Michael
That's
Barisone.
Barisone was in Jersey. So in most states, there's not a statute of limitations. So if there's no statute of limitations, they can be charged at any time. I mean, Bill Cosby, look how late it was after him before he got charged and convicted, by the way. But are they going to charge a guy who's 81 years old? Probably not, but a district attorney could if they decided to, if they thought it was strong enough. But the level of evidence required for a conviction in criminal court is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the highest legal burden that we have in this country, and we set it up that way on purpose because we want people to be innocent until proven guilty, because we don't want innocent people to go to jail. The standard is not the same in SafeSport, nor should it be, right? I shouldn't have to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt to fire somebody, to kick somebody out of my club, to stop somebody from being around my kids, right? That standard is lower. They just have to believe the accusations are credible and true. They have to believe that that's more likely that it's happened, and that's their standard. So, you answer your question, yes, he could. Would he be? Probably not. Let's see. After many states, let's see. Yeah, she's right too. A lot of states are introducing reviver statutes to list the statute of limitations for sexual abuse cases, but those are also, a lot of those are about suing for civil damages, because those there are statute of limitations on, but a lot of states are getting rid of those. I think New York just got rid of theirs, so that you can sue people for having molested you or something like that when you grew a lot older, whereas you probably didn't want to bring a lawsuit within 3 years when you're 18, right? So no one does that. But for a lot of states, the felony protections and restrictions don't exist, or they've been long ago torn up. Some states still have them for sexual abuse and rape. I'm sure that exists. And I also do want to make it clear what we're talking about here. We're not talking about sexual misconduct. We're not talking about he was too friendly with kids. We're not talking about, a pat on the back or being alone, right? We're talking about statutory rape with a child. And you have to understand that the dynamic between a professional athlete, an Olympian, and a child is immense, right? It's more than a teacher and a student. This guy is your idol. He's your icon. He's looked up in the industry. You're trying to train from him. You want to be great. You want to do everything he's done. And then that guy comes onto you and starts touching you or talking to you inappropriately. And we're talking about kids here. So that type of dynamic is extreme. And there are a lot of reasons why a child like that would never feel safe coming forward. And it happens a lot, which is why these statute of limitations laws are getting removed.
Well, anyway, I thought this might be helpful for everyone. I know that Steven's been helping me understand what's been going on. So wanted to share, and I can just say again, try not to jump to assumptions. Try to educate yourself as much as possible when you hear about stories like this, and read the news articles. And again, if you're going to say something behind a keyboard, ask yourself, would I say this to that person's mother? And don't be assholes. It's another good piece of advice, I think.
And the only advice I would have is, before you decide to make statements about whether or not you think something is fair or unfair, and I understand it's hard to find true information nowadays, but look into it, right? Look into it and determine whether or not the full process, the real process, is fair. And I can tell you as a lawyer, in my experience, based upon everything I've seen and how other agencies and organizations handle things, I think the SafeSport process is pretty fair, because they give both sides a very equal opportunity to do what they need to do, and they have a lot of safeguards in place. So are there things they could do to make it better, probably, but I don't think opening it up to the public to let the public know what the accusations are is one of them, because you want people to come forward. You want them to be able to talk about it, and they're not going to talk about it if they feel like them bashing their idols is going to be pushed everywhere on the news.
Yeah. The person that I knew that was raped as a child did not want to go forward. I mean, I can't even imagine. Yeah, they have to feel safe in speaking out, as safe as possible.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, thanks for watching today, guys. I hope this was helpful, and remember my advice of don't be an asshole.
If you guys have any more comments, drop them down, and I'll try to pitch in a little bit over the weekend, kind of answering any legal questions, and Deanna comments on everybody's stuff. So,
all right.
Good night.
Oh, by the way, that's gonna be $500.